This video is a follow-on to part 1 of the Maldives mystery. As discussed, the first video, part 1, was created in 2021, which is over 3 years ago. Since then, more information has come to light. This includes some more research performed on the MH370 data. That has had some bearing on what could have happened in the Maldives. We will now ask Charles to provide an overview on this additional information that has surfaced since the original video was created.
There are 4 main areas of additional information that has arisen since the original video was created over 3 years ago. The first area relates to establishing what aircraft was seen in the Maldives at 6:15 a.m. on the 8th of March 2014. In the first video, only one aircraft was mentioned. Since then, there have been 2 additional ones. So that now makes 3 possible aircraft. The second area relates to the 3 extra witnesses that claim to have seen an aircraft similar to MH370 on the nearby island of Gardifushi. This island is 58 kilometers south of Kudahuvadu, where the 20-plus eyewitnesses first saw the aircraft. Additional information has come to light that could place some doubt on the veracity of this sighting by these 3 additional eyewitnesses. The third area relates to the fuel calculations to see if MH370 could have enough fuel to be seen at the Maldives at 6:15 a.m. local time with at least a 15-minute fuel reserve. In the first video, we just used a PC-based flight simulator to calculate this. The fuel flows shown in this simulator did not exactly match up with the Boeing fuel flow tables used for MH370. However, the resulting fuel reserve was reasonably accurate. Since then, we have performed some more accurate additional fuel flow calculations using the actual Boeing fuel flow tables for the aircraft type. Lastly, since the first video, we have performed some more data analysis on the MH370 data. The result of this provided some additional information that could possibly downgrade the reliability of the satellite data. This is important to consider, as the satellite log is one of the main reasons used to eliminate the Maldives as a possible end destination for MH370. In the first video, our research just showed that there was only one large jet aircraft put forward for what was seen in the Maldives flying very low on the same day MH370 went missing. This was seen by over 20 independent eyewitnesses on the Maldives island of Kudahuvadu at 6:15 a.m. local time on the 8th of March 2014. Since then, it came to light that 2 other aircraft had been put forward as potential candidates. This now provides us with 3 possible aircraft to choose from. The first one is a -8 turboprop aircraft with the registration 8QAMD. This aircraft was proposed by the Maldives authorities. The second one was a Boeing 767 aircraft with no registration supplied. This was proposed by Duncan Steele, who was a prior member of the independent group. The third one was a Boeing 777-200ER, which was the same make and model as MH370. However, it had a different color scheme. The registration of this aircraft was HZAKF. This aircraft was proposed by Richard Godfrey, who also is a member of the independent group. Let's now go through each of these aircraft and see if any of them are viable candidates for what was seen at 6:15 a.m. in the Maldives on the same day MH370 went missing. The first aircraft, the -8 turboprop, can easily be eliminated. The reasons are that none were flying anywhere near where the aircraft was spotted, on the island of Kudahuvadu. Also, it looked nothing like the aircraft spotted, which the many eyewitnesses said looked very similar to MH370. This aircraft was much smaller and had propellers and not jet engines. Also, the local inhabitants were familiar with what the local domestic -8 aircraft looked like, and thus all rejected the aircraft seen as a possible match. We can reasonably eliminate the second aircraft, a Boeing 767, for the following reasons. No aircraft registration was supplied. No ADS-B or radar data supplied. No flight tracking data supplied. For example, Flight Radar 24. No details on the landing charges for the Maldives International Airport were supplied. No color scheme supplied. The independent group later replaced this aircraft with another aircraft, which was a Boeing 777-200ER. This implies that the independent group no longer supported this aircraft as a viable option. So, unless the independent group in the future put forward a 4th possible candidate for the 6:15 a.m. sighting, We are just left with the Saudi Arabian Airlines Boeing 777, so we will now try to go through all the facts we know to date about this aircraft, to see if it turns out to be a viable candidate for the 6:15 a.m. sighting. Firstly, this aircraft HZAKF was only put forward as an option over 6 years after MH370 went missing. Why did this take so long? Also, this was the third aircraft suggested. This does not provide one with much confidence. Point 2. There are no supporting published records provided to confirm the flight actually took place. For example, the ADS-B data, radar data, landing charges at the Maldives International Airport, and flight tracking sites data, e.g. Flight Radar 24. Point 3. There is no record of who was on board and what they were doing in the Maldives. Point 4. There was no reason given why a large commercial aircraft was seen flying between an estimated altitude of 500 to 1,000 feet with its landing gear up, also at that time being 185 kilometers away from the closest suitable airport that could handle an aircraft of that size. Point 5. With reference to the previous point, it goes totally against standard operating procedures for large commercial jet aircraft, like the Boeing 777, to be flying very low with its undercarriage up, over 185 kilometers from the nearest suitable airport. Point 6. The only evidence we have that this flight actually took place is from a WSPR-derived flight path for the aircraft. WSPR stands for Weak Signal Propagation Reporter. It is known that WSPR cannot be used to track long-range historical flights. Here are some comments made about it. In fact, even the WSPR creator Joe Taylor, who won a Nobel Prize in Physics for his research on pulsars and gravity, stated, "I do not believe that historical data from the WSPR network can provide any information useful for aircraft tracking." Another radio ham operator said, "I have been sending WSPR transmissions for several years now, and the reception reports called spots are extremely variable. Not only does propagation vary wildly from minute to minute, the only information in the database is the received signal to noise ratio. This varies unpredictably at receiving sites, as noise sources change randomly. Thus it is not possible to use WSPR to reliably track aircraft. Also, if WSPR was able to track long-range aircraft, it could be easily proven via tests. If it passed them, it would have been taken up by the Australian Transport Safety Bureau to help locate MH370. So far, after many years, this has not happened. Therefore, as no ADS-B data or radar data was available for this flight, we can reasonably deduce that this flight path was most likely just made up. Point 7. We have already shown that this route was likely made up. In addition, it appears that while this route was being created from the WSPR data, there were some issues relating to quality control that were not detected. The first issue is with the time the aircraft was calculated to be overhead Cuda Huvadhu. In the report it mentions that WSPR data shows the aircraft, the Saudi 777 with registration HZAKF over Cuda Huvadhu, at the local Maldives time of 7:55 a.m. An extract from the WSPR report states that the aircraft maintains a ground speed of 475 knots and arrives overhead Cuda Huvadhu at 7:55 a.m. local time. The multiple eyewitness accounts specifically confirm that the aircraft seen was at 6:15 a.m. The best witness, Abu Rashid, was actually fishing at the beach and stated he saw the aircraft just after the sun came up. Google tells us that the sun rose at 6:15 a.m. on the 8th of March, 2014.
ආදියා කියලා තිරින්ගන්න නැති දැන් අලගන්න ස්වර දැන්ගල බලන් හොරි දැන් ඒ දුරු අඩු අලගන්න බසිවුනි අලගන්න බොලාහම බෝට ආයෆහු ඒති ආය ආදියා خلاف තිරින්ගන් ඉගේ දැන් අස්ලුග ඒති හැම යගිනුම රෂ් ෆරෙක් කුඩ දුරුකාරිගේ දමා ෆින්ගන් අලගන්න හැම යගින් හැම ගැරන්ටියක් මොනවනම රෂ් ෆරෙන් දැන් දුරුහම වර දීතික කුඩ දුරු තන් හොරි ෆෙන්නම් වෙස්.
The radio waves would take less than a second to travel from the transmitter to the receiver. So that means the time the WSPR report states the aircraft was over Cuda Huvadhu is 100 minutes too late. This eliminates the Saudi Boeing 777 as the aircraft that was spotted at 6:15 a.m. The second issue is that the data in the WSPR file does not match up with the report. For example, the identifier shown in the report shows HZAKF over Cuda Huvadhu at 7:55 a.m., while the entry in the WSPR file has a time of 5:28 a.m. This is a discrepancy of 147 minutes. This means there is no correlation of the time in the report when matching with the Whisper data. The third issue is that the Whisper report shows the aircraft overhead Kudu Huvadhu at 7:55 am and then passing over Kudu Airport at 8:06 am. This results in the aircraft flying at 725 knots, which is not possible for a Boeing 777 aircraft. So to sum up, the Saudi Airlines Boeing 777 aircraft, proposed to be seen at 6:15 am in the Maldives, can be considered to be very unlikely, as it is now the third aircraft put forward. There is no ADS-B data. There is no radar data. There is no radar tracking flight data, e.g. Flight Radar 24. No landing charges data. No passenger list was supplied. No reason given for a large jet aircraft like a Boeing 777 to be flying so low with the gear up, miles from any international airport. The flight path of HZAKP, the Saudi Airlines Boeing 777, was calculated using Whisper. We have shown that Whisper cannot be used to track aircraft. Also, taking into account the quality control issues with the Whisper-generated flight path, shows that very likely the track shown is erroneous. In the prior video we interviewed 3 additional witnesses from a nearby island called Gardhifushi. This island is 58 kilometers southeast of Kudu Huvadhu, where the 20-plus eyewitnesses saw a large jet aircraft that looked similar to MH370 flying very low at 6:15 am. Since making the previous video, it has come to our attention that the 3 witnesses on Gardhifushi most likely did not see a similar looking aircraft to MH370 sometime early in the morning on the 8th of March 2014. The reasons are, later on another MH370 independent researcher interviewed them, and he believed they got their dates mixed up. These 3 additional witnesses only came to light over a year after MH370 went missing. This was on the 12th of December 2015, so that makes it 644 days later. It is not very likely that the 3 witnesses in the meantime would not have told some other people on the nearby islands what they saw. It was reported the large aircraft spotted did at least 2 orbits. If so, very likely the aircraft would also be spotted by the inhabitants of the nearby island of Thimarafushi. It is only 8 kilometers from the island of Gardhifushi where these 3 eyewitnesses lived. However, there were no reports from these islanders. From what we understand, the only reason an independent investigator traveled to Gardhifushi is that firstly he believed a Google Earth photo of the area showed a shape just off the shoreline that had similar dimensions to a Boeing 777 aircraft. And secondly, that Inmarsat, the satellite company, had got the pings the wrong way around. Hence the aircraft was in fact flying to the Maldives, and not as mentioned in the official report flying away from them. There appears to be some issues that various other MH370 researchers have brought up with regards to these 2 points. The first issue is that the Google Earth aerial photo that shows a shape with similar dimensions to that of a Boeing 777 is in fact just a cloud. Also, the date of the Google Earth photo is dated the 20th of December 2012, which is prior to MH370 going missing. The other issue is that the independent investigator believed Inmarsat, the satellite company, misinterpreted the BTO values and also reported them out of sequence. Hence he concluded the last ping from the aircraft was in fact close to the Maldives, and not as mentioned in the official report being in the southern Indian Ocean, which was around 4,400 kilometers away. The independent MH370 investigator assumed that in order for the aircraft to make it to the Maldives, with his interpretation of the satellite BTO values, the aircraft would need to fly a similar track as shown. This seems like an illogical thing for a pilot to do. Also, using long-range endurance settings, the maximum time MH370 could remain airborne is around 9.5 hours. To achieve this, it means flying at a reduced true airspeed of around 280 knots. To fly in the way suggested by the independent MH370 investigator at this airspeed would take around 11.5 hours. This means MH370 would have been out of fuel about 2 hours prior to reaching the Maldives. It is not very likely a company like Inmarsat could accidentally make these major mistakes. What would seem more likely, but was not mentioned by the independent investigator, is that if MH370 did in fact fly to the Maldives, then the only viable way that this could occur is if the BTO values were generated post-flight. One might imagine this could possibly occur if Inmarsat were required for reasons of national security to obscure the route taken by the aircraft. However, if one accepts the BTO values published as valid, then MH370 could not have flown to the Maldives. So to sum up, it would seem too coincidental that with such a high-profile incident that new eyewitnesses came to light over 600 days after the aircraft went missing, also the fact they were in effect tracked down by a satellite photo that predates MH370 going missing, and also an illogical interpretation of the Inmarsat calculated BTO values. On top of this, it seems very strange that the Malaysians would invite this independent investigator from Australia to fly to Kuala Lumpur in order to explain his theory, especially as his theory seems to make no sense, and also that the Malaysians confirmed in a press conference on the 19th of March 2014 that the aircraft seen in the Maldives was definitely not MH370.
Regarding reports that a plane was sighted in the Maldives, I can confirm that the Malaysian Chief of the Defence Force has contacted his counterpart in the Maldives, who has confirmed that these reports are not true.
So the end result is that we believe we cannot put too much weight on the second set of eyewitnesses. In the prior video, we used a PC flight simulator to see if it was possible for MH370, a Boeing 777 with its known fuel load, to be still flying over the Maldives at 6:15 a.m. local time with at least a 15 minutes fuel reserve. The PC-based flight simulator we used in the prior video was based on a Boeing 777-200LR aircraft. MH370 was a Boeing 777-200ER. The flight simulator we used for our testing was meant to use around 2.5% more fuel compared to MH370. After comparing the fuel flows of our flight simulator against the Boeing fuel flow tables, we noticed they were in ballpark, but not accurate enough to establish if MH370 could make the Maldives at 6:15 a.m. local time and still have at least 15 minutes of fuel reserve. So as it is quite important to establish whether MH370 could still be airborne up to 6:15 a.m. with at least 15 minutes fuel reserve, we recalculated the fuel calculations. This time we used the Boeing fuel flow tables. Here are some of the things we took into consideration when doing the fuel flow calculations. Typically when engines get older, they can become less efficient and burn more fuel. MH370 at the time of its last flight was over 11 years old. Malaysian Airlines had previously calculated that this would increase the aircraft's fuel flow by 1.5%. We also took into account the outside actual and forecast temperatures. Typically with warmer temperatures the aircraft would have higher fuel flows. We estimated that the temperatures would be around plus 10 degrees centigrade, above the standard temperature of 15 degrees at sea level as used in the Boeing fuel tables. This would increase the fuel flow rate by around 2%. So taking the age of the engines into account and also the higher than standard temperatures, we calculated that this would increase the fuel flow as shown in the Boeing tables by around 3.5%. We factored this into our fuel flow calculations. On the last flight segment from Penang to the Maldives, we reduced the power settings to the minimum. That will safely allow the aircraft to remain airborne. This will then allow the aircraft to fly for a longer time, as it will be burning less fuel per hour compared to the normal cruise settings typically used by pilots. This lower fuel flow setting would typically be used by pilots when they are holding prior to landing, for instance waiting for a thunderstorm to pass over the airport, etc. This will then help reduce the airline's fuel costs. The end result after performing the fuel flow calculations is that it was possible for the aircraft, after being spotted in the Maldives at 6:15 a.m. local time, to still have enough fuel reserves to ditch into the sea, out of sight from the inhabitants of Kuta Huvadu. Here is a summary of the fuel flow calculations. If the aircraft was flying using both of its engines all the way to the Maldives, then if it just flew there, without doing any additional descents or climbs, soon after the aircraft disappeared off secondary radar, it could end up in the Maldives at 6:15 a.m. with around 17 minutes fuel reserve. If after disappearing off secondary radar, MH370 instead quickly descended from 35,000 feet to 1,000 feet. And for instance was then heading for a target like the Petronas Twin Towers. Then if the aircraft was remotely taken over and climbed back to its original altitude of 35,000 feet, this additional maneuvering would reduce its endurance by around 11 minutes. This would mean when spotted in the Maldives at 6:15 a.m., its fuel reserve would be reduced from 17 to just 6 minutes. However, if instead the aircraft reached Penang at around 2:06 a.m. Malaysian time, and one of its engines was turned off, and it proceeded onto the Maldives with just one engine, it would use less fuel. Turning an engine off is a very easy thing to do in a Boeing 777. This would mean the fuel reserve when flying on one engine and going straight to the Maldives would be increased from 17 minutes to 49 minutes. When trying to perform another 9/11, e.g., diving down to 1,000 feet and then remotely being taken over and climbed back to 35,000 feet, the fuel reserve on one engine would be increased from 6 minutes to 38 minutes. As a sanity check, we compared our figures to that calculated by Boeing for MH370. The Boeing calculations assumed the aircraft was flying in standard temperature conditions. When we changed our calculations to use standard temperatures, then we were effectively comparing apples with apples. The figures they came up with were very similar to ours. When the aircraft would have reached Kuta Huvadu at 6:15 a.m., the Boeing extrapolated fuel reserves were 27 minutes and ours were 26 minutes. That's just a 1-minute difference. For more details on how we calculated the fuel reserves, and also how we compared our fuel reserve figures with the extrapolated Boeing figures, please see our website. The largest hurdle for MH370 to be considered a candidate for the aircraft seen in the Maldives is the satellite log. In essence, this data is contained in an Excel spreadsheet that shows the aircraft flying away from the Maldives. If the satellite data can be confirmed to actually represent the signal sent and received from MH370 after about 2:28 a.m. Malaysian time, then this would eliminate MH370 as the possible aircraft seen in the Maldives. However, our multiple other technical videos seem to indicate that a lot of the MH370 data does not seem to fit in with the official report. If our findings are correct, then a reasonable conclusion is that this could downgrade one's confidence in the validity of the satellite log data. So although this does not prove that the last few pings in the satellite log are erroneous, it does however cast a significant amount of doubt as to whether we can be confident enough to be able to use the satellite data to totally eliminate MH370 from being the aircraft seen in the Maldives at 6:15 a.m. Therefore, we think it reasonable to conclude that we cannot totally discount the possibility that MH370 could have ended up in the Maldives. The sighting of a large jet aircraft seen in the Maldives at 6:15 a.m. on the same day MH370 disappeared, now 10 years ago, still cannot be explained away. This is also heightened by all the other strange things that are connected with the MH370 mystery. For instance, why were 3 different aircraft proposed to be the one seen in the Maldives at 6:15 a.m.? Especially after analyzing these 3 different aircraft, it appears none of them appear to be a viable option. Our fuel analysis shows that MH370 could make the Maldives at 6:15 a.m. with a sufficient fuel reserve to be able to ditch out of sight from the inhabitants of the island of Kuta Huvadu. This is strange, taking into account that many press articles and TV programs that stated that MH370 did not have enough fuel to be seen in the Maldives at 6:15 a.m. Our general analysis of the MH370 data that was covered in 13 videos indicates that a lot of data seems to have been modified post-flight, including the ACARS details held in the satellite log. We have documented these multiple anomalies, so it then follows it is reasonable to assume that it is possible for other data, such as the last 6 satellite pings, could also follow suit. This means that we cannot be totally sure that the satellite log could then eliminate the Maldives as a possible end location for MH370. All the above-mentioned points are compounded by the fact the aircraft black box pingers were never detected. The aircraft crash site has not been located. The Malaysians stated that they did not send up any fighter aircraft to search for MH370. This is very strange in a post-9/11 environment. No civilian radar or military radar data was provided from neighboring countries. This information one would expect should be included in the official report. No air traffic control transcript or ATC audio from Vietnam. This is very unusual as MH370 was allegedly handed over to Vietnam just before it went missing. As we previously mentioned, it appears many MH370 data sets have been amended post-flight. For instance, the captain's flight simulator data, the air traffic control audio and transcript, third-party flight tracking sites data, ADSB data, Malaysian primary military radar data, and the Malaysian civil radar data. The Australian over-the-horizon radar system was unable to help in locating the aircraft, although its exact capabilities are kept secret. But from the unclassified information available, it most likely would have been able to detect MH370 if it ever flew into the southern Indian Ocean. It is strange that for over 10 years it is still not possible to identify what aircraft was seen flying low over the Maldives at 6:15 a.m. on the same day as MH370 went missing. If it was not MH370, what was the registration of the aircraft? That looked very similar to MH370. And why was it sent to the Maldives? One possible explanation that could fit well with Occam's razor, that states normally the simplest explanation is the correct one, could be that the aircraft seen in the Maldives was MH370. If someone hijacked the aircraft, it had to end up somewhere, and the Maldives is somewhere. Also, why the aircraft looked very similar to MH370. The simplest explanation is that it actually was MH370. This would also mean that we do not have to explain away why someone would send a very similar looking aircraft to the Maldives on the same day MH370 disappeared. Especially on that day, it also had to arrive in the Maldives within a short 71 minutes time frame. The reason being the aircraft needs to be seen in daylight. Therefore, as morning civil twilight starts at 5:53 a.m. in the Maldives, this creates the start of this 71 minutes time slot. The aircraft was seen in the Maldives flying level, meaning at least one of its engines was running. The calculated maximum time before MH370 would have run out of fuel is a few minutes after 7 a.m. Therefore, just after 7 a.m. would be the end of this time slot. So this makes the sighting of a similar looking aircraft to be very coincidental to MH370, as it had to be seen not only on the same day MH370 went missing, but also within a small window of 71 minutes.
Thanks for watching. For more information, please click on the links below. Please do subscribe to our channel and click the like button and share our video.